When I first moved into the neighborhood, it was pretty um, ugly. It wasn't a very attractive neighborhood. It's still not the most attractive neighborhood, being right alongside the overpass and the highway. But there was literally garbage floating by in the spring, and just seemed very neglected. And but I could see, when I was working on my garden, that the kids in the neighborhood, wanted to be a part of it and wanted to learn. And so it just slowly grew from picking up garbage around, the area, to kind of more formally sitting down and thinking, okay, so if we wanted to build a neighborhood association and do things that would make the quality of life in the neighborhood better, what would we want to, how would we go about that? And we had, made contact with different city representatives and community organization representatives, and I remember actually, coining or coming up with the name Citizens Committee, le Comité des Citoyens du Village-des-Tanneries, and it was without really any prior knowledge of the fact that that's basically what this area had been called at one point. But we wanted to simply create a feeling of being in a village, that it takes a village to raise a child, and the whole bit. So we wanted to develop a sense of belonging and ownership amongst people in the neighborhood. And so the term village seemed appropriate. And it was only afterwards that we realized that, in fact, it was one of the older villages that was at the beginning of Montreal, and that the name had come from the fact that there were tanneries here. And we've since seen pictures of how the land was divided and how this was the first parish in Montreal, and so it's kind of nice that we've gone back and discovered our roots, and that in itself helps people to feel a more sense of history and pride and attachment to their place. And we've discovered also, what's happened to the neighborhood over the years, and that too has given us a chance to, you know, meet people who were here, for example, the first time that the highway was built, and what that was like, and present that information at the BAP, the Bureau d'Audience Publique. And that was quite effective because a lot of people couldn't come themselves, but to be able to, have their story told, really made real to the commissioners, I think, the fact that this project would have a huge impact on the community, this community by the highway that doesn't look like much, and many people would think would probably be better off just being relocated somewhere and put a wall up and problem solved. But it would entail a big upheaval and uprooting of many families and many people who are attached to the history of the place and to everything that we've been able to build. We are kind of cut off, and what we had discovered, when we first started working on this with the CLSC and the city, was that people don't really travel beyond the limits to, get the services they need. That we needed to bring services right into the community, and so the Citizens Committee wanted, to work with different organizations, but for them to come and to do what they do. So the Eco-Quartier, for example, would help with getting people to plant flowers around the trees, and we built a community garden and things like this. And I don't think that without a deliberate effort being made to build community, that this necessarily would have been more cohesive just because we're separate. I think on the contrary, I think that we would have continued to. I think that what happened in this community was basically not recovering very quickly or very well from the wound of being cut away or cut apart by the construction of the original highway, and by all sorts of construction that back then didn't take into consideration things that we would today in terms of how people communicate, or how people need to get from point A to point B. So I think that the neighborhood would have just continued to get more and more neglected, and probably would have slowly died. So, and that's still, a possibility. If half the community is taken away, then it will be much difficult to sustain a sense of belonging here. So by working with community groups and other people that were interested in this issue and that understood the potential impact, we learned a lot about the effects of car emissions, and the Department of Public Health, as I mentioned earlier, has been raising this issue for years, and sending information to the government about the health impact, and the fact that if you're within 200 meters of a highway and you're a senior, you're 55% more likely to end up in hospital, or if you're a pregnant woman, you're more likely to give birth to a premature and low weight baby. And these are studies that even have been done in Montreal and around the world that are facts. They're like, when you smoke, I mean, you're smoking in spite of the face of a huge volume of information that, shows that it is going to give you cancer, or it, highly likely. So I think that we now have information that we didn't know before, and I know a lot of people will say, well, it doesn't take a scientist to figure out that it's not healthy to live near a highway or near a high traffic road, so why do you choose to live here? And there's unfortunately many answers to that. I mean, one is that the highway came after the community was here, so a lot of people have been living in this community and have stayed in the community in spite of the highway, in spite of, and then there's the simple fact that housing is cheaper, and that people don't always have a huge choice of where they are going to settle, and so, and there's the fact that on a day-to-day basis, air pollution is not something that we can see tangibly. It's not something, so we tend to adapt a little too well to our environment and to very uncomfortable or unfavorable, environmental conditions. And so, and as I said, people tend to be preoccupied with things that they need to survive, and so they don't really take stock of the fact that this is not the healthiest place to raise a child, for example. And then there's the truth of it is that this is only one example of an area throughout Montreal where the level of pollution is higher than it should be, and so this is not really an isolated issue. It's not just near Turcot. It's near Tannery. It's near the Metropolitan. It's actually near Saint-Denis. It's near the Notre Dame highway. This is a problem that really does touch all Montrealers, and this is something that early on we realized we would have to really try and convey to people in order for this issue to become bigger and more important than just what was happening in this little community. And the expropriations, potential expropriations to the 400 some people was serious and was bad, but even worse was the fact that this is a situation that is affecting everyone in the city and everyone in Quebec in a sense, and so it certainly opened the door to being able to look at bigger issues. It makes it much more complicated to kind of work in a group to try and decide how to tackle the problem and how to mobilize people, because these are all really abstract and complex things that most people don't want to think about on a daily basis. So, most people are comfortable and they like to drive their car, and they don't want to think of the fact that because they're choosing to be lazy and to travel, 6 blocks in a car by themselves instead of walking or taking the bus, that it's actually having a health impact on people in the neighborhoods nearby.